Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound, but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into the wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. Each episode, my guest and I explore these time loops, one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the first stop at 1959's Season 1, Episode 10, Judgement Night. Here with me is my guest, Rob, from the Great Escape Minute. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, but I seem to be having deja vu here or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe I've been here before, or maybe I haven't, but I'm not really sure. I know my name, and I know where I was born.
Yeah, me too.
And that's about it.
And, you know, I'd like to welcome you to this second season of It's Time to Rewind. This is the first episode of the Twilight Zone, or Trapped in the Twilight Zone. And for those listening, I'm doing things a little bit differently because I'm looking at the early episodes of the Twilight Zone in the original series, and these aren't quite like the traditional Groundhog Day time loops where there's a lot of repetition within the episode. In most of these, there's only one repetition and it only shows at the very end. So instead, I'm going to be putting myself in the time loop, and I will be covering this episode with 3 different guests. So I will be within the loop myself, here trapped in the Twilight Zone. And so starting off here with Judgement Night from the first season. So if I remember right, you said that you've had 0 experience with the Twilight Zone. Was that right?
I wouldn't say 0 experience, but I don't have any continuity experience. Let's put it that way. Over the years, I've seen episodes here and there, but I couldn't tell you which episodes I've seen. You know, I've seen some of the big ones that most people know about and stuff like that, and possibly, you know, I saw the Twilight Zone, the movie, which has a few things also, a few great stories. But in general, I couldn't tell you, okay, I'm a big fan of the Twilight Zone, and I've seen every one of the episodes of the first 5 seasons, and every one of the episodes when they do something, you know, in the version from the 80s, or all the episodes even of the recent Jordan Peele version of them. I haven't. Jordan Peele, Poole, sorry. So, which goes to show how much I really know about the recent Twilight Zone episodes. So I've seen episodes here and there.
Yeah, and I also, you know, don't have a huge background with the Twilight Zone. I know a few years ago, back whenever the Twilight Zone was on Netflix, which currently in the US it's on Hulu and Paramount Plus. And I started going through the first season. I think I made it 10 to 15 episodes in. I honestly don't remember seeing this episode before, even though if I was going in order, I probably would have made it to this one. I also had
it's interesting that you don't have deja vu of it.
Yeah.
Wait, so when you watched it now, did parts of it come back to you?
No, it felt completely brand new to me the first time I've watched it. Yeah,
Wow.
As we're recording this, I have seen it, I think, about 3 times now, over the past 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a little bit harder for me to put myself back in that first time viewing, but I definitely didn't remember seeing this episode at all. I think the one episode I do have memory of, besides some of the more well-known episodes, like the guy.
It's a cookbook.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that one at all. but I've seen like some of the earlier ones, like the ones where they're
I s-
characters trapped that are like toy box characters, like the soldier, the ballerina. I remember seeing that one.
that
Which
actually sounds very familiar. The for me that I saw the cookbook one after I think it was the Naked Gun Part 2, or 2.5. I think that one they had someone running around with the thing saying it's a cookbook, and so I it got me interested to figure out what it was. So I went and watched that episode.
Yeah, I feel like that is one that maybe I should look up here as I'm doing this season because I'm a big Simpsons fan. I have one of the Simpsons aliens tattooed on my back, and that was the episode. They did the parody episode To Serve Man, in that one as well, where they keep blowing
Right.
all the dust off the book, and it's like it's a
Well, that's
cookbook.
the
No,
thing
it's
with The
not a
Simpsons.
cookbook.
The Simpsons, every episode, there's just so many references to so many different things, which is why it's so genius. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
And which is why they can also go for so many years.
yeah.
I mean, what are they on, season 30 or something like that at this point?
33, I think, is the
There you go.
one
Okay.
that's
See,
that they're
as I
doing
said,
this year.
I don't watch TV shows. It's been a while since I've seen The Simpsons.
Yeah, and that's an extremely major commitment. That's over 700 episodes if you start from the beginning
Especially
now.
especially since none of them age.
Yeah.
It all takes place in the same year.
But
You could say that they're in a different dimension if that's the way that's working.
yeah, and surprisingly, they actually only just recently did a true Groundhog Day style episode for last year's Halloween of Horror or Treehouse of Horror, where Lisa is stuck in a time loop, which I haven't seen that
Oh
one
wow.
yet because I haven't fully been keeping up with the more recent seasons. But back to the Twilight Zone. Uh, this episode we haven't really talked about the plot of this episode. Um, it features a character, Carl Lancer, who we eventually find out is a captain of a German U-boat, but he is on this British ship. The I should have written
The
down the name.
Queen, the SS Queen of Glasgow.
Yes, the SS Queen of Glasgow. He doesn't really have a very clear memory. Like he knows his name and that he's from Frankfurt, but that's about it. And then he slowly gets bits and pieces of his memory as the episode goes along. But he's on this ship, and he is a very fidgety and tense. Like like he's worried about something or frightened by something, but he doesn't know what it is. And all the other characters are just treating him like he's just a normal passenger. And then we eventually find out the twist of the episode is eventually he does see a German U-boat in the distance, and he sees himself as the captain. And we find out that he is actually basically reliving this ship that he attacked because it had innocent people, women and children, on it. And so he's doomed to relive their deaths over and over again. Even though that's the twist isn't revealed until the very end, where things start over for about the first 30 seconds or so of the episode repeats at the very end. So what did you think about this episode in general?
Okay, well, first of all, I had no idea what I was going to be watching. I didn't do any research beforehand on the episode. I figured I was going completely blind.
Yeah, other than the fact that you
And
knew it, there was at least some hint of a time loop or repeating in it.
correct, but I kept looking at the runtime as it was moving along, and I'm like, where are they going to put another time loop in here? I was thinking it's something like Groundhog Day, where even if it only has one time loop, but I think it's 24 minutes or 25 minutes, something like that. And as the time is moving along, I reached the 15-minute point, and I'm like, okay, when are they going to start this time loop? And then I get to the 20-minute, and I said, they're not going to have time for another time loop here. And as you mentioned, they have just a little minute snippet, of showing him basically doomed in this time loop for the rest of eternity. That's what it seems like. It's not, using the example of Groundhog Day. It's not something where we actually see how he deals with reliving this time over and over, because as opposed to Groundhog Day, where Phil Connors remembers everything that's happened, this character doesn't remember anything. All he remembers is his name and his place of birth, which makes it even, I guess, scarier from that perspective, because he's reliving this nightmare every single time. Phil Connors is able to try and change his destiny. Here, this guy, Carl, is not able to change his destiny at all, because each time he's supposedly reliving this event, it's gonna play out in the exact same way.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference where in Groundhog Day he's stuck in the time loop as, I mean, it is a form of punishment in a way, but it's more like
It's a
jail
punishment
sentence.
looking for redemption.
Yes. Like
Here, there's no redemption for him.
yeah, exactly.
This is just the punishment.
This is purely punishment for punishment's sake. That this is like the punishment of the afterlife, where he's not intended to learn from his mistakes. He just has to deal with his consequences. And
Right.
it's so he's not able to learn and grow from his mistakes and become a better person. He is just stuck living out this punishment over and over again, almost like some of the like Greek mythology punishments, like the Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, and he's doomed to repeat it over and over again,
Right.
where he's not able to grow as a character because he has this memory loss, and he starts at the very beginning from minute zero. Once again, everything is reset, including him, and so he just is stuck with this punishment, this fear that he has to experience living on this ship with all the people that he killed. And I'm curious, do you think, like, what do you think about the other passengers? Do you think that they are also spirits, like ghosts of the people that he killed, or do you think that they are like just a maybe more of an ethereal manifestation of Lancer's punishment?
Wow, that's a great question. Now, when I was watching this movie, this episode, I didn't even think about that. So, when you think about it, I believe that this is either something that he saw happen. Maybe from afar, he maybe saw when they were shooting at some of the passengers. One of the passengers we see, she gets burnt along the way. Maybe he sees those things from the U-boat, and therefore his memory is keeping him with those people. Or it really, as you mentioned, it could just be a manifestation of the types of people that could theoretically be on board this type of ship. When you look at it, each of the characters are very diverse. You have, and they all seem in some ways like stereotypes. You have the captain, you have the purser, you have the engine room guy, which, I love the fact that his name is McLeod. It goes to show that the Scottish engineer is always around, whether you're in, the 24th century in space, or whether you're on a British, maybe even a Scottish ship, because it is the Queen of Glasgow.
Yeah.
And then you also have an American businessman on board. You have a British officer along with his attaché, who's a female. So, I mean, the 24 or 25 minutes of this episode don't give us enough development of each of these characters that we can really get to know who they are, but they give us a general idea of who they are.
Yeah, the other thing that I noticed, especially after watching this episode a couple different times, is that the other characters, aside from Lancer, spend a lot of their time on screen facing away from the camera. Because generally, for the most part, the camera is focused on Lancer with him in the middle of the screen. And a lot of the characters tend to be, closer to the camera and facing Lancer. So we get to see
Wow.
like the side and the back of their heads for a lot of times. There are a few times whenever we get a more direct shot where they're facing the camera, but they do spend a lot of time facing away from the camera and towards Lancer, where we're focused a lot on his face and his performance with him. He spends a lot of time. I love part of his performance, and the actor that plays Lancer is Nehemiah Persoff.
Nehemia, say the
Nehemiah.
Nehemia Persoff, which according to IMDb is still alive. He's 102.
Yeah, that's and he's had a pretty long career, and I love his performance. He does a lot of the shifty eyes. He spends a lot of his time on screen as he's trying to remember. His eyes are darting back and forth, and it really gives the impression that he is trying his best to actually remember what is going on and who he is and how he got onto this ship. And I think by having all the other characters, facing him, that does two different things. It makes them feel like less of a character, like it gives them less personality. So they seem less important than Lancer. And also it makes it seem like everybody on the ship is focused on Lancer as a character. And I think for those reasons, I feel like that they are actually the ghosts of the people that he was wronged, and everything that they're doing is designed to torment him in one way or the other. Like
Okay, I would actually add another thing to that the fact that they are constantly looking at him, which means he has to constantly look them in the face.
Yes.
For him, these are no longer faceless people on the ship. When as the U-boat captain, when he blew up the ship, they were all faceless passengers. Here he actually has to face them and see their reactions throughout this entire time. Where the funny thing is that he's the only one who's scared. None of them seem scared throughout the entire episode until they're actually being attacked.
Yes. And they seem worried.
They're going about their lives. They're
Yeah.
worried, but but they're not scared. They even have kids.
Yeah.
And there's the scene towards the end where he's trying to save everyone on the ship, and then he looks at a corner and basically sees everybody. I think there's like 8 or 9 people, if I counted correctly.
Yeah, and they're all and that's one instance where they're all facing the camera because it's a direct shot. The camera is looking at them all as a group, and they're all facing the camera. But in that instance,
but only for a few seconds.
Yeah,
it doesn't last very long at all. It's a fleeting shot, but it works really well to give us an idea as to how many people are really there, and who he's. I'm assuming that this type of ship would have more people on it than that. There are. Was I right? There are 10 people in the picture, and some of them are even like the engineer is not there. There's an old couple. There's 2 kids. The captain's not even there. So they're.
I think another thing that makes me think that these are ghosts of the people that died is because we do see a couple scenes that don't have Lancer in them. Like we see the captain talking with the engineer about the engine, and that's something that Lancer is not a part of. And we see the captain saying, keep an eye on this Lancer character. And if we're looking at this as this is all centered around Lancer and his eternal punishment, that would be something that wouldn't factor wouldn't necessarily factor into his punishment. But
Right.
if it
That's
is,
more for us.
yeah,
That's more for us to get an idea as to what is really going on there.
yeah, but I like to think, it's like I understand from the storytelling perspective that it's to give the audience information, but looking at this with a fine-tooth comb, as is often done in these movies by minute style podcasts, that it does help show that it's other characters that are talking to each other, that are more than just this manifestation. So
Right.
I like to think that that helps support my theory that these are ghosts that are stuck with him, but they're not so much being punished as they're the ones that are punishing him.
Right. But just by being there,
Yeah.
that's what punishes him. Because part of the thing also is he sort of gets to know who these people are,
Yes.
and that adds to to the way that he has to deal with this, because he reaches a point where he's trying to save everyone,
Yeah.
not just himself. He's not saying I want to save myself. He wants to save all of them.
Yeah,
And
he's
that
trying to get them all to the lifeboats.
right.
And I think this does do a good job to show, at least at the beginning, that he's not necessarily a bad person per se. Like at the very beginning of the episode, you see him, like whenever he first goes into the galley, he picks up the little girl's doll and hands it
Right.
back to her. And that is pretty much like, an act of kindness. Is something that he wouldn't necessarily have to do, but it helps get you on his side uh, initially. It makes
Right,
it
because
seem,
we don't know that he's a German U-boat captain.
yes,
We just think he's another passenger on the ship. So the fact that they show us that he's this kind man who's helping this little girl and whatever, that's also part of the shock factor here. That they show us that he's the main character, and we're supposed to sort of root for him until we figure out what's going on, and then you start thinking to yourself, okay, should I be rooting for him? Should he be punished for everything that he did? Because when we see him as the U-boat captain and we hear his reasoning for everything and the way he looks at it, even when Mueller starts saying stuff to him, his attaché or whatever, starts telling him that I'm not too comfortable with the fact that we just killed women and children for no reason, and he's like, I don't care.
yeah, and he's
So then we get to see what the person he really is. The question is, which is the real
which is the real life.
which is the real Carl?
Yeah,
Which is the real Carl?
and it's interesting too because whenever we do see Lancer as captain on the U-boat, he feels like a very different character, because
Yes.
while he's on the Queen of Glasgow, there he is, he's nervous, he is unsure of himself, he does have moments where like his memories come and he starts talking very quickly, almost like he can't control what he's saying. Like whenever he's
That's when
talking,
he's talking about U-boats.
yes, yeah, whenever he's talking about his, things that he knows in his past, but he doesn't necessarily remember being a spirit. It's like he can't control them and they're just coming out very quickly. But every other time he's talking, he is very much searching for the words. He is very dreamlike, where he's like, I don't know where I'm going. I am going away from home. It has that very almost dreamlike cadence to it.
Right, but then it also goes to the fact that once we find out that he's a German officer, then we say, okay, well, where's all this English coming from?
Yeah, and I that one I think I will just completely um, you know, give that this is an English um, program.
Heaven.
Well, it's an English program made for English audiences, so they just, especially like whenever they're on the ship, that's one of those narrative devices and storytelling devices that I I think me as a person tends to be a lot more forgiving than some people who are more nitpicky are. That's
Right. No, I'm not trying to be nitpicky here, but I'm looking at it from the perspective that okay, if this is his punishment in the afterlife, so for obviously for audience sake, they're going to have everyone speak English. But here you have someone who has complete amnesia, has no idea who he is, and people start asking him at the beginning, "Are you American? Are you British? Where were you born?" Things like that, and takes him a few minutes till he can remember that he was born in Frankfurt. And once he says he was born in Frankfurt, then you start saying to yourself, "Okay, wait a second. So if why are you speaking English? Why? Yeah, I mean, as a good example, have you seen the Lifeboat by Hitchcock?
no, I haven't.
Okay, so you should. That's first of all. It's actually my favorite Hitchcock movie because it all takes place within a lifeboat. It's an hour and a half story with I think like 10 passengers on a lifeboat who have just been their ship has been shot by a U-boat, which obviously I guess you can connect to this type of story also. But there is a German on board, and at one point the German does start speaking English. At the beginning they think he doesn't know English, and then he starts speaking English, and he basically gives the impression that all German officers are taught English so that they can, speak to the enemy or whatever it is. So maybe that could be also part of the idea here. That he's on a ship and he sees the name of the ship and therefore assumes in his mind even that since he doesn't know who he is and he knows English, so he must be someone who speaks English.
Yeah, but also like whenever we do get the flashback of him being on the ship, which I'm curious what your thoughts are on the the moment whenever we do see the interaction. Do you think that that is a flashback going back to the time where it first happened, or do you think it's his memory where Lancer is basically put back into him without into his own memory where he has to relive it first person, but he's not
Right.
so much in control because it's things play out the way that they did whenever it first happened.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to mention that in those scenes where he's on the U-boat speaking to the other German, speaking to Mueller or any of the other German officers on board, so there I am more forgiving about the fact that he's speaking English because that is completely for the audience sake. There's
Yeah.
no question about that. That's not something that I think that they've now all decided that they're going to start speaking English. Your question was, is this a memory or is this what's really happened, or is he being thrust back into
Or
his
is this a
older self?
flashback for like a narrative flashback where it's showing the audience how what had originally happened, or if this is like a basically a flashback within Lancer's memory that he's experiencing in this moment within the story.
Right. Well, first of all, the end of the SS Queen of Glasgow, that aspect of it, once the ship is sunk, we see the life preserver with the name of the ship, and then we sort of get a blank screen for a fraction of a second before they once again show the German U-boat, which tells me that okay, his character has now Carl has died again on this ship with the other passengers. So then your question is he now remembering what happened before, or is he experiencing it once again? I think I think it's meant to. I think it's meant to be a memory to show us what happened beforehand, because otherwise it's not really much of a punishment. If you look at it from the perspective that he's now being told once again how he acted beforehand, even though his mind is going to be wiped clean once he goes through this once again, I still think that it would be pointless to tell him at the end of each of his manifestations what he said beforehand, because it's not going to do any good. So I think those 3 minutes or whatever where they show us what happened, his conversation with Mueller, I think that's for the audience. I don't believe that Carl is experiencing that once again.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I honestly hadn't thought about it that much ahead of time. It was something that I just popped into my head now, and
I didn't either because I didn't know you were going to ask the question.
But yeah, I do think that you make a good argument for that, where it is a flashback for the audience's sake, rather than reminding him of who he was before his punishment. I think it does make sense that in this context he is just there to relive his punishment over and over again. And the only thing that gives me just a slight pause that might think that he could be reliving it, or like put in his past self's head, is at the very end of that conversation. Like, most of it is him being, the very different, the arrogant, confident Lancer, where he doesn't care about the British that he killed. For him, that was just, that was just like a war medal. Like, that's like a point on his belt, or a notch on his belt. That was a victory through and through, and he just has the brief mention of, well, yeah, in the eyes of the British, of course I'm damned, but, and then what he doesn't say is, but in my eyes, I'm doing the right thing, and
Right.
and I'm completely justified in doing this. But at the very end of that conversation, we do get a close-up of his face where he has this slight fear pop into his eyes, and that could be something that he experienced the first time around, where he did like give it a little bit of thought and then brushed it off until, like, we don't know how Lancer died. We don't know if he lived to a ripe old age, passed away, and is now reliving this punishment from something that happened earlier in his life, or if he, passed away not long after, it may be in a different battle within the war.
Right. Okay. I want to mention two things about that. First of all, I'll talk about what you just said about we don't know when he died. I think it would have been even more powerful if right after this happened, something, a torpedo would have come and blown up the ship, blown up the U-boat or something like that, and then, we'd realize that, okay, this is his immediate punishment. I mean, as you mentioned, we don't know. He might have lived till 1959 when the show came out, and at that point he's reliving this or whatever.
Yeah, I know they mentioned that the British ships are supposed to be in a convoy, so in theory there are other British ships that are.
Yeah, but because of the fog, they're all split up.
Yeah.
Or at least the SS.
Or at least
Queen
they
of
can't
Glasgow.
see each other, so they.
Right.
They could be nearby.
No, but they say they lost the convoy. Lost could mean that they completely lost them, or they just can't see them.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that they could be 3 feet in front of our bow, but we can't see them because of the fog.
It could be. I don't remember specifically that they said that. I thought that they were. At one point, they mentioned the fact that they're no longer with the convoy because they can't see them because of the fog, and that they'll try to find them tomorrow when the fog lifts. I remember, but it could be that I'm misremembering that
Well,
they did
and
say
also
something about
like
that.
there is the mention of their engines because their engines haven't been maintained and they're running them at maximum, and at one point the engines die, and so
Right.
they're adrift. So I think that would cause them to fall even further away from the convoy,
Right.
whether or
But
not.
that's later on,
Yeah.
not at the beginning. At the beginning when they're talking about it. And the second point I wanted to mention was the fact that during his conversation with Mueller says to him, "We could die 100 million times."
Mhm.
So, there we can maybe infer from that whether it's him remembering that, or whether it's for us to listen to, as an audience. Maybe that's the number. You were talking last season about Groundhog Day, that nobody knows the exact number of times that he relived all of those loops. Maybe what it's possible that Mueller is not even a real person here. Maybe Mueller is, if you want to say that Carl is now remembering what happened, or maybe God or the universe or fate or however you want to call it is trying to teach him this lesson, that maybe Mueller is not a real person and is part of that manifestation to tell him, okay, this is your punishment. You're
Yeah.
going to now have to die 100 million times in order to redeem yourself for what you did.
Yeah, I could see that, and uh, there is like one last thing that I wanted to bring up, which is something that is mentioned in the closing narration, where Rod Serling says that Lancer has to pay the fiddler, and I was curious, and I did just a little bit of brief digging into the origins of that phrase, the pay the fiddler, and that I did find like a couple different ideas, and it's not entirely clear. The longer form of the phrase is actually, he who pays the piper names the tune, and that is generally thought to be pretty much face value. Pipers or fiddlers would be brought in for entertainment, and whatever royalty or lord that brought them in for the entertainment would be the ones who would have paid them, and then they would be the ones that dictate what they played. So that's it's pretty much face value. The person that pays them is the one that tells what they pay, or what songs they play. But slightly more recently, the meaning has kind of changed a little bit, and it's become to mean, that somebody has to pay the price for their own actions. And that meaning of the phrase most likely comes from the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And that's for those who might not know it, that's, the town of Hamelin had a problem with rats. And this Pied Piper comes in and he promises to get rid of them as long as, the town pays him. And then they agree, and then he plays his piper and draws all the rats out of the town, and then he comes back for payment, and the town refuses to pay them. It's like, we don't have any rats anymore, we don't need to pay you. And so, as punishment or as payment, depending on how you look at it and which version of the story you're listening to, he then uses his pipe, his music, to lure all the children of the town away, and he, either kills them or keeps them. But they're, from the town's point of view, their children are pretty much gone forever, and that's them paying the price for what they did to the piper. So,
Right. Now, I mean, when I looked it up, I actually found something very interesting also, because it basically said that the definition of pay the fiddler is to face, accept, or suffer repercussions for one's actions or words. Especially that would be expected to incur punishment, which I think fits in perfectly here, because it's both his actions and his words.
Mm.
He torpedoes the ship or shoots the ship, and it destroys the ship. How's that? And then afterwards, he tries to defend himself for what he did, and that this is an act of war, and this is the way it's meant to be. So I liked the way that they did that. I mean, if you want to start talking about Rod Serling, I mean, if you listen both to his introduction and to his I guess outroduction, in the it's written beautifully. I mean, if you think about some of the sentences that he says in there, and I was like completely blown away that 62 years ago, someone wrote something so amazing that still can resonate today, if you think about it. I mean, if you pay attention to exactly what was said there, he talks about the ship. He gives us information about the ship that we don't even need to know, but it comes up later. The fact that it's a 5,000 tonnage. It's the gross tonnage is 5,000. That's something that's mentioned later on by the Germans. The age, they say indeterminate, which basically, there's no way of knowing what the age of the ship is, but it also doesn't matter the age of the ship, because the idea here is that this ship is about to be destroyed on the one hand, but on the other hand, if you're talking about something that is going to be in a time loop, so it's for sure indeterminate, because maybe it's 1 million years old.
Right.
That this keeps going on and on. And the fact that they tell us that the ship is 1 day out of Liverpool, that means it's not that far off the coast from that perspective. I mean, I think it's a few weeks trip by ship across the Atlantic at that point. They're only a day out of Liverpool. I love how it talks about that the types of things that you normally will log in the ship's log along the way. The sailing time, the course of destination, weather conditions, temperature, longitude, latitude. I mean, it gives us so much information as to the types of things that people do pay attention to when you're dealing with a ship, but then you never deal with the fear. The fear is something that he's basically telling us this is all. We're looking at this from a psychological perspective. We're not looking at the physical aspects of things. Which, once you figure out later on that this is a time loop, that this character is living over and over, so that also tells us so much about it. You have to deal with emotions, not just with the physicality of everything, because if this is all in Carl's mind, in heaven or the afterlife or between heaven and hell or whatever, exactly. Any place doesn't matter where it is, so it's not a physical place, but there you can still have the metaphysical stuff and the psychological stuff and stuff like that, and the way that he compares, he says fear is like throbbing strokes of engine pistons, each like a heartbeat parceling out every hour into breathless minutes of watching, waiting, and dreading. Again, I'm just amazed at the writing. At this, and they call U-boats steel killers, the unseen periscopes of steel killers, where in this instance we actually get to see the U-boat surface, because in most submarine movies the submarine stays underwater when it's shooting a torpedo to try and blow up a ship. It's not going to reveal where itself, but here that actually does reveal itself.
Yeah, and I didn't mention it, but this episode was written by Rod Serling himself.
Yes.
I haven't done a whole lot of looking. I know he wrote many of the Twilight Zone episodes, but not all of them.
Right here, he wrote. He wrote 71 of the episodes. Did the teleplay of 21 episodes of the total 156. So you're right. Okay, he only did about half that he wrote.
But I think that's about all the notes that I have. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention about this episode?
A few little things. I mean, did you notice that in the galley there's this like sign on the side of on the wall where it makes very little sense, because it basically it's hard to read. You can only read part of it. You can only read the top half of it anyway. I was trying to. It's like a little blackboard that says lifeboat drills, and then it looks like it says 10 p.m. and 9 p.m. or maybe it's 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. or something like that. It's interesting that they basically say that they have, 2 lifeboat drills a day on this ship.
I didn't
Meaning
catch
they're really
that.
expecting that, and when they get hit, nobody runs to the lifeboats but Carl. So it goes to show that the lifeboat drills don't really help in this case, and I couldn't make out what was written underneath it. I also enjoyed the fact that whenever anybody walks into a room, the lights go out and then come back on because they're trying to keep blackout.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to wait to discuss that a bit more with my next guest, who's has a little bit more historical background. So I was going to get into some of the more historical things, but I did notice that with the blackout, which the first time I watched that, I was like I didn't quite understand what was going on. Like I noticed that the lights kept going out and turning back on, but it wasn't until I watched it a couple more times whenever I realized, oh, they're doing that so the light doesn't get out through the open door.
Right, but the whole question that I have and we won't get into the historical aspects of it because I don't know anything about the history of it. That I'll leave for you for next week or the next episode when you deal with that. But who turns the lights on and off? Is it a mechanism? Like, how do they know when someone walks into the room? Because it's not like they knock or they signal and then they say, okay, turn off the lights and then let people in. It's they open the door and the lights go out. So I wonder if maybe it's something you can ask your future guest, whether it is something that they did in a mechanical way. Like you can do that nowadays. You have that with your refrigerator door. You have the little button that, when on the inside. I mean, at least we all believe that when we close the door, the light goes out. We're not really sure unless anyone's actually gotten into the refrigerator to check it out from the other end. I've never tried that, so I couldn't tell you.
Well,
But maybe it's
I'm
some
kind
sort
of
of
an
simple
engineer-minded
mechanism
person.
like that.
Yeah, I'm the engineer-minded person where I found like the little switch, the trigger that the door pushes to where you can turn the light on and off if you find that little switch that the
Oh
the
yeah,
door
no, of course
hits.
I know that. I know
Yeah.
where that is. Yes, that I know. I think now it's a sensor than as to a switch. I remember we used to sometimes just put tape on it in order to keep it off all the time and stuff like that. But yeah, so that was one thing I wanted to point out. And what else was there? The whole thing with the passport was very strange also. Like he says, if he doesn't know anything, so how does he know his passport? You don't see him checking his pockets when they ask him for his passport. He
I
automatically
noticed
says,
that.
I left it in my room.
Yeah, I think that's just a little element that helps tell the audience that he doesn't necessarily belong there.
Right, obviously. And if the captain is that suspicious, he should have sent someone right away. He said, "Oh, we'll check it tomorrow. We'll bring it to us tomorrow after you get a good night's sleep." And then, when he sends the guy to the room, he says, "Make sure to check it."
Yeah.
That type of thing. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Again, when he's talking with the guy from Chicago, I can't remember his name, the guy on the war production board. So he has a few interesting quotes in there. Also, he calls it a pocket battleship and a skulking crummy tin fish, meaning that they'd rather that a battleship attacks them than a submarine. Which, if you think about it, the idea then goes back to the whole thing with Carl, how maybe the reason that he has the U-boat surface in order to attack is so that they can actually see who's attacking them. He's not doing it completely in secret. And that could be what the businessman is talking about also. That if I'm going to get shot at, I want to see who's shooting at me as opposed to just, getting torpedoed.
And he does in the whenever he's talking about the U-boat tactics, he mentions that it would just be one one German U-boat that would attack them, and you would see it because it would surface before it attacks.
Again, to add to the fear, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that about covers this first episode. I'm really excited to get to talk to more people about this episode and then the other Twilight Zone episodes. But thanks again to you for being my first guest on the second season.
Oh, I'm very honored to have been chosen to be your first guest.
And
I guess no one else wanted it. So, I'm always willing to be your guest, Bubba.
all right. So
Just like I know you're always willing to be mine.
yeah. And so why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you online?
All right. Well, first of all, I have my personal website, which is movierob.wordpress.com. I have movie reviews coming out there every single day. As of now, right now, this is November, so I have about 8,300 movie reviews, many different types of genres, even superhero movies, which I wouldn't be surprised if I found a few that you don't know yet. So we'll have to debate that some other time. Besides that, I have my podcast, which I'm right now in the middle of season 1 of The Great Escape Minute. So you can check that out. Our website is thegreatescapeminute.com. Our Twitter account is greatescapemxm. We have a Facebook group called The Cooler. And if you want to send us an email, it's thegreatminute@gmail.com. I already have plans for a second season, maybe even a third season. So, if The Great Escape isn't your cup of tea, then maybe we'll be able to find something that you'll like in the future. Hopefully in March or so we'll come out with season 2. So you can check that out. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, so my Twitter account is RealMovieRob, and my email address is rob@movierob.net.
And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. And if you would like to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do it. I do have a Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/flightstitesandmovienights. And at $3, at the $3 a month level, you can get early access to this, to podcast episodes. And I will, once I get more patrons, I'll also have polls available where you can help decide what movies I review and potentially what movies I cover on future seasons of this show. Or if you don't want to pay any money, I also appreciate if you leave a rating or review of this podcast, primarily on iTunes. I think is the one that's is still one of the most popular ones and one of the few that still has the reviews option. I know a lot of podcast listening services don't really have ratings or reviews. You can also like the episode, I think, on Google Podcasts, and just share the show if you like it. So to help other people listen to this show, I'd really appreciate that. And then, until next time, I will still be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone. For one man, it is always 1942.
Lights in the salon. Let's black out down there.
And this man will ride the ghost of that ship every night for eternity.